Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here. My name is Khosrow Behbahani, and I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of College of Engineering here. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to have Dr. Nielsen with us today. If I was to give you all his accomplishments and all his great things that he has achieved, it would take a long time, so I'll just give you a brief summary. Dr. Nielsen got his physics degree from the Air Force Academy and got his master's and PhD from UC Davis in applied science. He's a member of IEEE. Most of you probably know IEEE. How many of you know what's IEEE? All right. That's the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. He was also a member of National Academy of Engineers, one of the greatest honors that an engineer could have. He's also a fellow of AIAA. How many of you know what's AIAA? All right. And that's the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. In addition to all of these wonderful accomplishments, Dr. Nielsen has served our country in the Air Force for 32 years and achieved the rank of general, Major General, and also he was the director of the research for the Air Force. And that's all the way up to 2004. In 2004, he joined the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon. And since then that he has been there, he has grown that institute to have 600 professionals working in this area and has got about $136 million of research as far as the data that I have. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nielsen.
Gosh, that was a nice introduction, as they say. I wish my mom had been here to hear that. Or even more, my mother-in-law, because she never thought that much of me. Toward the end, when I became a general, she started to think a little bit more of me, but it was a tough sell. The people that introduced me and my wife had been friends of theirs, and when I announced that we were getting engaged to them, they said, "Oh boy, this is bad." And I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Well, they were saving her for Prince Charles, who turned out not to be such a bargain." You know? Well, it's a real honor to be here today. Gosh, I had a great day here. I got to talk to some of the faculty members and some of the students, and I was overwhelmed. I mean, such great work going on here at UT Arlington. The school, the faculty, and the students can be really proud of the kind of folks that are coming through here, the work that you're doing, and the potential that each of you have. Because I can tell this is a place still on its way up. It's still going to become a better place. And the students are going to go out and do even better things. I was really impressed, and that's a great thing. So, long ago, some of us saw this movie called War Games. How many people here saw War Games? You know, Hollywood's a lot better place to ask questions about than almost anything else. And I saw it, and I thought it was a really neat thing. Matthew Broderick there, I can't remember his name in the movie, but Matthew Broderick. He kind of phone freaks into the Cheyenne Mountain command and control system, somehow starts a game and almost creates a nuclear war. Okay? Well, it was interesting, and it did start to alert us to cybersecurity, but it was completely bogus. Actually, about 10 years after this, I was assigned to Cheyenne Mountain and worked in it. And even in 1995, there were no phone connections into Cheyenne Mountain. It had no internet connections. It had separate circuits because it was a nuclear command and control focus point, right? So, although the movie was a great movie, it couldn't happen. The other thing interesting about it, you see all these screens here? Cheyenne Mountain never looked like that. It didn't look so modern. We had one time when I was there, and we used to give, in my day, this was before 9/11, we used to give a lot of public tours. And so we'd have public tours even come in. They could be organized by the Department of Defense for other governments. And we had a lot of people from Japan come in, from the Japanese military, to see Cheyenne Mountain. And we showed them everything, we gave them the brief, and they said, "Where's the real Cheyenne Mountain? This is just not very impressive." But it was the real shiny mountain. It did its job well. It alerted us to the fact that cybersecurity could be kind of important. Even in the era, sort of pre-internet for us. The internet was already around. And phone phreaking, kind of a strange thing, phone phreaking. So this is the early ARPANET. Not real impressive. Kind of happy Carnegie Mellon was already on there. Case Western was on there. You can see Lincoln, MIT. And as most of you know, it was designed to be a network for academic researchers to collaborate. When you think about that, you go, well, I don't need a lot of security on that, do I? Because these are all trusted people and we're doing academic research. So in the early days of the internet, there was no real concept of security. The whole idea was to make it easy for people to collaborate and to have the minimum set of protocols to do that. And I think that people did a really good job. Nobody at the time knew all the potential of the internet. But by creating just that minimum set, they actually opened up an era of innovation that has kind of surprised all of us with all the things that have come from the early internet. One of these men, let's see if I can find him here. Oh yeah, it's this guy. I'm going to get up here for a second. It's this guy right here. I actually got to know later on, and he's still around, Robert Kahn, a great guy. He was at Bolt Beranek Newman, later worked in the government for a while, worked at DARPA, you know, kind of made the circuit, and is still a very smart man. His brother, by the way, was a man named Herman Kahn, who wrote a classic book in the 60s called Thinking About, in small letters, on thermonuclear war. And he talked about the issues with that, which is pretty interesting. So now here's the internet. We can't even represent the internet. There's so many connections, so many points. So here we're trying to represent it somewhat by the brightness, by how many connections there are. Please go in. And the internet gives us the ability to be anywhere in the world, in a sense, to talk with anyone in the world. Today, while I was waiting between some talks with people in the faculty, I FaceTimed with my wife, you know, who's back in Pittsburgh. It gives us that connectivity that's so nice for people who are now global people. Because many of us travel all around the world. Many of us are students where we're away from our family, but we can talk with our families no matter where they are in the world. This connectivity that it's given us has been amazing. And there's more to come. There's more to come. Basically now, we live in a cyber environment. And of course, cyber is kind of an interesting word, comes from the Greek, you know, but it's kind of come to represent what we think of this great world. And the heart of cyber work is not all software, but the heart of cyber is software. Now, when I retired from the Air Force in 2004, and as was mentioned, I'm kind of a physicist, an applied scientist, more a physical scientist than a software guy. But I noticed at the end of my Air Force career that most of the advances we had, whether they were in aircraft, space, information, directed energy, even material, somehow had software in the loop. Somehow software was playing in the midst of that. As an enabler, or sometimes, because of the difficulties of delivering great software, as an inhibitor for technology transition. So if we want technology to continue to advance and continue to transition, whether it's aeronautical, electrical, material, we need software to work, and we need software to be easier to transition. Okay? When you look at this, you see aircraft. I flew here. Anybody else fly here today? Everybody else is local. Okay? Aircraft have a lot of software, so does the air traffic control system. Automobiles. How many drove here or got here on a bus? Cars. You know, a high-end car now has 100 million lines of software in it. And that's even before we go to autonomous vehicles. 100 million lines of software. Controlling the brakes, controlling the steering, controlling the ignition features and the mix of oxygen and fuel, controlling the entertainment systems and the maps and the airbags, right? All that software driven. Homes, remote homes, industrial things, the SCADA, supervisory control systems, around the world are slowly, not slowly, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say, are quickly moving to software control in all fields. Cyber environment underpins commerce now. So we were talking earlier about banks, and the fact that you can travel anywhere in the world. Sometimes you got to tell them in advance, but swipe your ATM card and get cash. In the old days, most of you too young to remember this, you had to worry about traveler's checks and letters of credit and all that sort of stuff to travel overseas. Now, I've traveled overseas where when I got there, I've looked in my wallet and I've got about $3 and no foreign currency, and you go to the ATM machine and you immediately get some foreign currency. And for many of your bills, you just swipe your credit card. You don't even have to pay a currency, right? So it's commerce. It's, how many of you go to like a fast food place and never use cash anymore, right? You swipe your card, right? It's so fast, it's so convenient. Soon we might be swiping our phone. I don't know, that's kind of an Apple thing, but maybe we'll be swiping something like that. We love the conveniences that software brings us, right? It brings us closer to people, and it makes it easier to do so many things. It actually enhances productivity in so many areas. Software controls help out. When we look at some of the robotics in manufacturing, it's amazing. We couldn't build integrated circuits if it wasn't for software and the software rules that build all the basic photolithographic techniques that are there. When I was a young Air Force officer in 1973, I was assigned to a place that's become more famous, but used to be very secret, called the National Security Agency. And my job there wasn't to spy on people, thank God. It was to actually help protect things from spying on us. And so we were in the early days of integrated circuits. And one of my jobs, I was a reliability physicist. And so I went to the places that built integrated circuits to make sure the parts were ready to go into boxes that were going to be on the front end of satellites to protect the command and control of satellites. I remember thinking, this is really neat stuff. And I remember going to one company and they had a 256-bit memory. 256 bits on one chip. We thought we were in heaven. How can that be? And now, it's in the millions and gigabits of, the mega and gigabits for memories. Just amazing, right? And not only that, but it's so cheap now. I mean, memory is almost free. We've almost gotten to the point where bandwidth is free. We're really getting to those points where it's just amazing what's happening. And there's other types of manufacturing that's done. One thing that's really important, that's another aspect of software engineering and all engineering, is modeling and simulation. And what a big impact modeling and simulation has on manufacturing. How we can build things in computers, in models, in CAD/CAM systems. Build systems that we can view, we can walk around, we can see if there's space to do something or not space to do something. And then turn that into drawings right away. And a lot of the advanced aircraft, from the commercial aircraft like the 787 to military aircraft like the F-35, automobiles, all of this take advantage of that now. It also improves access to public services and other even commercial services. So today, if there's an emergency someplace, most universities have automated warning systems to their people that come through instant messaging, emails, all that, to get to everybody no matter where they are, right? Because everybody carries a phone now. You don't have to hear the siren going off. You don't have to know, God help us, if there's a shooter situation on a campus or something like that. The warnings come and tell you what to do and try to keep you safe. This is true in other kind of emergencies. SEI has worked on systems right now to help people when you're in limited bandwidth but high demand situations. A Katrina, a Hurricane Sandy, a big earthquake and tsunami like at Fukushima, where there's not as much bandwidth but you have to help people. software systems, communication systems have really changed the calculus on this and helped us keep more and more people safe. They also enable national defense operations. And this is true of all nations, not just the United States. We say national defense in the US, and sometimes it sounds like we're talking about the US, but China, not the Soviet Union, that doesn't exist anymore, Russia, Iraq, Iran, all these people use software systems, communication systems to help direct their military forces and to help keep their people safe. So whether it's commercial, manufacturing, banking, national security, software already is at the heart of almost everything we do. And in the future, we got this next big leap that we're getting ready to make, going from the internet of smartphones and hardwired interconnects to the internet of everything. Today we were talking to some people because some of the challenges that come from smartphones and the attack surfaces that open, the new vulnerabilities that open by smartphones, we're just starting to learn how to handle them and how to make smartphones more secure. But now we're getting ready to make that leap where every object in the world is going to be connected to the internet. One of the things they say is that, I guess as of the end of 2013, there were 9 billion devices connected to the internet, roughly one per person. Okay? In 2020, just 7 years from 13, 5 years from now, estimates say between 30 and 50 billion devices will be connected to the internet. And almost all those new devices are new things that have not been connected. They're not computers and desktops and or smartphones. They're thermometers in your phone, in your home. They're refrigerators. They're your car. They're all these things that are going to be connected to the internet. How secure are those going to be? Some of these will be legacy systems that are somehow newly connected just by a small addition or modification. When they were designed, what were the cybersecurity implications of that? What thoughts about security went into that? And you know that the answer to that is probably very few. So how are we going to have this system of 50 billion connections and all the permutations of that? And how are we going to make that secure enough that we feel confident? This is one of the real challenges that this generation has. This is one of the great challenges that this generation has. And each generation kind of faces those challenges, solves those problems, and comes up with ways to use these new technologies and to use them for great effect. So security concerns have grown remarkably over this time. This is Morris, the man who created the Morris worm in 1988. He was a Cornell student. His dad actually worked at NSA. His dad was a VIP, a big executive at NSA. And supposedly, in his defense, he said, well, what I was trying to do is create something that could tell how big the internet was, that would kind of go out there and search all the internet nodes. The internet in 1988 wasn't very big, but he still was trying to do that. But what happened is it actually launched a massive denial of service attack because it consumed all the resources of the internet. As this happened, there was a big alert to DARPA, the Defense Acquisition Research Project Agency, who created the internet, saying something's happening on the net and we need to fix it. They immediately called the Software Engineering Institute, who worked for them, and said, you guys are our software experts, you got a problem, you got to solve it. And so that's when my organization first got involved in cybersecurity in 1988. That prompted what we call the founding of CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team. And now there's about 62 national CERTs around the world, about 250 CERTs of all kinds. Some are subnational. In the US, there's a US CERT, but there's also an Air Force CERT, an Army CERT, a Navy CERT. There's a UK CERT, an Australian CERT, a Japan CERT. These are all over, and all these organizations cooperate together because the vulnerabilities on the internet of one place are the vulnerabilities that we all face. That's the nature of the internet. It has no boundaries, it has no geography. And then this was kind of personal to me. In 1994, I was the commander, I was a colonel in the Air Force then, and I was the commander of something called the Rome Laboratory at the time. is now part of what's a consolidated Air Force research laboratory in Rome, New York. And I think it was on Good Friday in '94, my CIO came in and said, something's suspicious on our network. We think something's going on. So they said, by the protocols of the time, we're supposed to call the US CERT, which actually was in the Department of Defense then. It's now in the Department of Homeland Security. We reported it. They said, oh, and this is stuff a lot of people don't know. Actually, the formal reports don't say this. They said, oh, we've seen this before. We'll be there right away. So they were actually in Rome. It's about 3 hours from there. It's about a 1 hour flight, but getting together and getting on the airplanes took a little bit. And we bought them a lot of, what was the big drink at the time? It was a drink that a lot of computer scientists drank that was very citrusy. What? Jolt. Yeah, we bought them a couple cases of Jolt, a lot of potato chips, and put them to work. And quickly they said, we have seen this at actually 22 other defense sites around the country. We probably got to you through one of them. We have some options. We can clean you up, or we can try to catch them. What do you want to do? And in my naivete, I said, well, let's catch them. And they said, good. And I said, how many other people have cooperated with you? I said, you're the first. Most people just want to make this go away. I said, well, if we just make it go away, we're never going to catch people doing this. So we had about 48 hours of pretty intense searching. And according to US law, this got pretty interesting. Because at first, not only were the defense kind of forensic people there, but the FBI was there. But then, all of a sudden, we traced it to a loop in Europe. So then the FBI moves out, and we're starting to talk to Europol and Scotland Yard. And then it loops back to the US, and FBI's back in the game. You know? We did this a few times, and ultimately we found a physical place, a house that it was coming from. But by that time, the guy was off. Okay, it's guy. I don't want to mean to be gender strange, but most bad hackers are guys. That's just that's probably some. To be equal, there's probably some pretty bad ladies out there too. So, according to the rules in Scotland Yard, this was in England. They said to arrest a person, we have to do it while they're electronically in your computer. So we have to wait until he's back in your computer. So we kind of bide our time. It's nighttime in London, you know, it finally comes up today. And it was on Easter Sunday. He's back in. And so we tell Scotland Yard by phone, they go to the house, they break down the door, and they arrest a 15-year-old boy. Honest to goodness. And this 15-year-old boy, he actually was a phone phreaker. He actually was getting into the nets through phone phreaking. Most of you know what phone phreaking was? That was a way to kind of make long-distance calls without really paying for them. People learned the tones that you could do in the old days on long-distance phones. So he was a phone phreaker, and he had been lots of places before he came to us. He'd been in the Air Force Flight Test Center. He'd been in the F-22 office at Wright-Patterson. He'd been in the Navy Research Lab. He'd been in the South Korean Atomic Energy Commission. He'd been in the North Korean Atomic Energy Commission. equal opportunity guy.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Who was he calling as a 15-year-old?
Well, he called into nets that allowed him to get into the early internet.
Yeah, but who was he trying to call?
Oh, he wasn't trying to call anybody. He was trying to get into those nets. Kind of using a modem to get in. This is the days of modems, basically, right? So his penalty, ultimately, was that they took his computer away. Because he was a minor and they couldn't really punish him. And for us, it was actually, we cooperated with the government to catch him, and we actually caught a lot of hell about this. Because since we were cooperating, this became a real public case, and the headline said, you know, Rome Lab was hacked, and all that stuff. And didn't mention the people that were hacked before us. But, you know, sometimes you got to do the right thing even when it hurts a little bit. So we did that. So this kind of got me tuned to cybersecurity as we went on. And of course, nowadays, you know what cybersecurity issues are like. We all know this. 600,000 Facebook accounts are hacked per day. per day. And they're backfilling, trying to fix those things. 30,000 websites hacked per day. Just the Navy, the US Navy, 110,000 attacks on the Navy per hour. Think about that. Now, most of these attacks are stopped. The 110,000 are stopped. What we don't know is the 110,001 that didn't get detected and made it through. 18 victims of cybercrime per second. A lot of these are kind of minor things. You know, your credit card is hacked and your bank kind of protects you from that. Maybe some of your personal information was stolen. And the lowest number I know of the economic impact of this is actually this $100 billion annual cost of global cybercrime. There's some estimates that are more in the $500 billion level. There's been some government speakers who probably had gone over the edge with hyperbole who say 1 trillion, 1.5 trillion. Whatever the number is, it's pretty big. It's pretty big. Yet, how many of you have lost money from a cyber attack yet? Anybody? You lost some money, actually?
Well, I got it back eventually.
You got it back, right? Anybody lose money and not get it back? We're all protected by this, by the banks right now. Because the banks actually build into their cost of operations a certain percentage of loss to cybercrime. Isn't that amazing? And even though the percentage is a low percentage, the amount of money flowing through the banks is so big that I think this number is on the order of $9 billion a year that the banks accept as losses. $9 billion. I couldn't pay for that. I don't think most people here could pay for that. It's a lot of money. So it turns out there's lots of routes, lots of vectors for people to commit cybercrime. And I'm going to talk about some of them. And one rewarding thing talking to some of the researchers here today is that many of the people here are working on some of these issues. They're working on some of these vectors because it's recognized how important cybercrime can be. First of all, one route is actually through software flaws. A lot of software is built poorly. A lot of software is built with known software errors that aren't compiler errors, so they make it through the software, but we know open up vulnerabilities. Buffer overflow, cross-scripting activities, things like that. SANS and others have sort of a list of the 25 top software flaws that could be exploited. They've done studies, and 69% of all software out there has these flaws in it. 69%. Jeez, we're not doing such a good job. You see some of the errors here. We did a study recently, SEI, on financial apps for Android systems, kind of things you download. Our number was less than that. 65% had flaws in it. These are not solitaire. It's not Sudoku. These are the apps to get to your bank, the apps to get to your investment company or your mutual fund. 65% on the Android platform had security errors that we could identify. Now, I mean, we're supposed to be white hat people, so we informed everybody about the flaws that we said, and I'm positive that all those flaws were fixed. The issue is that this isn't going to solve the whole problem. This isn't going to prevent all the cyber attacks, but this will take the amateurs out of the business if you correct these kind of flaws. This will take the easy stuff out of there, the easy cyber attacks. There's estimates that these software flaws account to 70 to 80% of the vulnerabilities in software. Okay? Now, there'll still be people who are clever enough, talented enough, advanced enough to attack your software with other ways. But we could clean things up quite a bit if we just prevented some common software errors from being implemented in our software. Zero-day exploits are out there, you know. Acrobat Reader. How many people have Acrobat Reader on their computer? Everybody, right? Everybody. This is one of the really most widespread pieces of software. And they had a feature in their sandbox that actually allowed exploits. They've fixed that now, you know, don't worry. But these things don't have to exist very long for people to exploit them. And exploit them on rather large levels because the internet is so big, so accessible. Heartbleed. How many people have heard about Heartbleed? That was a big thing about a year ago, right? Heartbleed is an open source system. A lot of us have talked about how open source is a really good thing because so many eyes can be on it. How could there be security errors in something that's open source? Huh. So this was used by a lot of financial organizations and others for secure communications. And it turned out for 2 years, it had a flaw in it that enabled people to get what was supposed to be encrypted information on your credit card, the PIN numbers, the CVV numbers, and all that stuff delivered to them. Broad system impact. It affected so many people around the world. It's largely been fixed now, but how do we know if it's been fixed everywhere? It's been fixed probably in the big systems that you use every day, but it's probably got some lingering vulnerabilities out there in the internet. So one of the things we believe is that you really have to build security into software from the very start. Usually when you start building software, you think about all the great functionality you're going to give, the new capability you're going to give. And that's important, but we think people have to start giving some concern to the security of the system if they want that system to persist, to be safe, to be used for long periods of time. There are lots of ways to do this. One thing that we're really encouraged by is the new move a little bit to something called DevOps, which is sort of an extension of Agile. It's an Agile with some consideration about the operational part of the life cycle. We think that's important. And when you start thinking about the operational part of the life cycle, you have to think about security, okay? We think it's important in the early stages to think about cybersecurity requirements, even in the government, even on critical software that the government's building in the US. Often the security requirements say only this: the code should be secure. Well, that's not enough. You got to think about what that means. How are you going to test it that the code is secure? What kind of trade-offs are you going to make of security against usability? Because you can make code secure, just it might not be very usable, right? I can make almost any computer secure by disconnecting it from the internet. But how useful is that to me then, right? Think of your smartphone and not being connected. Not real useful, right? So we have to find where is that trade-off. What levels of security do we need? What kind of tests might we need? We need to think about these things early in the cycle, because after we think about the security requirements, we can think about the architectural implications of that. And one of the great things about architects is architects are the first people to try to make those trade-offs about requirements. And to be able to say, well, we can do this if we design it this way, but it's going to cause some problems over here. On the other hand, we can design it this other way to emphasize these requirements. Most of the time, you can't get everything you want. So how are you going to make those trade-offs? How are you going to make those arguments about how much security you need versus how much usability versus how much performance versus how much wow factor that people want to talk about when they talk about apps, right? Another thing that's happened recently, though, that's very good, that helps us in this, is the idea that in the old days we used to build software, integrate it, and test it. And now, through the use of some of the advanced models that we have, we can actually kind of do a virtual integration of software very early on and look at the implications of that virtual integration in architecture before we actually build the software. It's kind of like the CAD-CAM thing in the mechanical side, where we can build systems in the computer, look at what the problems were, even examine sometimes some of the physical features of that, the vibrational techniques, the flutter and other things, the strength of materials, and see how that in the computer design would work. Now we can do the same thing for software systems and look at many of the parameters. We can look at performance, we can look at security through virtual integration. We do think it's important to adopt some of the secure coding standards that are out there. And I talked today with one of your professors who said he teaches a course on secure coding, on how to build code that at least doesn't have those 20, 25 fatal flaws in it that open up vulnerabilities. On our side, we have researchers that have put out some books, Secure Coding for C, Secure Coding for C++, Secure Coding for Java. Oracle has adopted the Secure Coding for Java. We're trying to get these principles embodied in international standards, and ultimately we're trying to get these now embodied in compilers, so the compilers will warn you of these errors. That might seem like an obvious step, but in the past, when people looked at some of these to put in compilers, they found that to get around this, the compilers would end up generating code that took a big performance hit. They could build code that was more secure, but the performance hit might be 50%, 60%. And the trade-off was, that's not quite worth it. We think we've got this down to where the performance hit might be just a few percent. And that's probably doable as we try to work this with the compiler community. The other thing we can do that's important is when you buy code, especially code that's important, we may be able to check it for compliance with these standards to make sure it doesn't have those kind of errors in it. The concept of assurance planning, which came out of Europe on the idea of use cases and safety cases, also applies to what we now call security cases. So we can think through some of these things and think how we should verify them. Can we verify them with tests? Can we verify them with formal methods? Can we verify them through some other kind of argument? And try to make sure that we have at least some argument for the security principles we need of each kind of feature in the program, even though we can't maybe verify everything through formal methods. And we know we can't verify everything through tests. Since so many people are moving to the agile methods, one of the things that agile is that agile methods, since they do sort of sprints and start building software kind of early and build it in small increments, maybe 2 or 3 week increments, one thing that happens in the agile movement is sometimes as you get further into the program, you find out you've built so much technical debt, so many issues that to build the next feature, you have to re-architect the program. If you have to re-architect too many times in a big program, you've lost lots of the benefits of Agile. So one of the things that we're sort of pushing at SCI is how much architecture is enough to help you avoid too much technical debt. We don't want to build big architectural documents that take years to build. That's not an Agile feature, right? We want to build software that works. But is it worth maybe having the first Agile sprint be a design and architecture sprint to think about the key features that you might have? And would that protect you from much of the technical debt you would build up in national class, defense class software that is really large? We think that's one of the answers to that. And more recently, what we found, when my early days in the Air Force, I was building software systems, we thought that once we delivered software, it wasn't like hardware. You didn't have to maintain it. It was done. It worked or it didn't work. Well now, how many of you get a little notice every day on your Apple or Android phone about a software update? I mean, we get those all the time, don't we? It turns out there's a big maintenance tail on software now. Not only for software flaws and bugs that are being fixed, but also for new features that people want to add. There was a big study done by the National Academy about 2 years ago on software maintenance. It found that the cost of, if you looked at the total life cycle cost of software maintenance was more than software development. And software development's big enough. So we have to start thinking about the maintenance aspects of software, even in the design. And that's one of the features of the DevOps kind of development, is if you know that the maintenance cost of software are going to be kind of large, maybe you even want to consider that in design. And design your software in a way that makes it easier to maintain, easier to add new features, easier to reuse the code. Now, one thing that is kind of new is the software supply chain and the vulnerabilities in that. We've long known that there's kind of vulnerabilities in the overall supply chains. Everything's gone global now. We have bad actors around the world, criminals around the world that sometimes build fake parts and try to sell them off, right? And so the supply chain has become very important in the hardware sense. Supply chain is also very important in a software sense. When you buy software from someone else, what do you know about that software? How do you know how it was built? We know there have been problems in that. There's been a fake Netflix app that's been out there. And this Netflix app was built in Russia. It looks just like Netflix, but it's at the supply chain of the mobile devices. And what it did was it would take information from your phone once it was installed, whatever you put in bank accounts and credit card information and stuff, and ship it to a site in Russia. That's probably not what you intended when you kind of loaded that Netflix app. Now, the real Netflix app doesn't do that. It's a good app, but it's hard to tell the difference. And you probably can't tell the difference. It's your phone provider that has preloaded that has to tell the difference. Okay? Lenovo preloaded an app called Superficial on the computers. It had some problems that opened the door to third-party access to your personal information. It was on, I think, about 25% of Lenovo products that were delivered in the United States in about 2012, 2013. And it also made it harder for your computer to recognize fake websites. You know, sometimes people try to spoof you going to a website that's not the real website and to enter information. So we think it's very important for the manufacturers that build computers, that build cell phones, that put this stuff on, preload this on your computers, to take some steps to verify third-party software, to make sure it's the real thing. There was also a time in the US about 4 years ago where Cisco routers, people were getting some pretty good deals on Cisco routers and found out those Cisco routers weren't Cisco routers. They were built by another source and had some special software in there that was siphoning off data or replicating data and sending it to other places. Inside organizations, even if you get past the coding problems, even if you get past this supply chain problems, there's some other simple things that have to be done to kind of protect your software. One of them is just some sort of organizational features of cybersecurity. You know, people don't often want to think about all the patching that needs to be done, all the setting of the network devices and such. But it turns out that that's really important. 96% of the Fortune 500 firms say they've been attacked. The other 4% have been, but just don't know it yet, right? Almost all of us have been attacked. When you look at the smaller companies, some of the smaller companies think, well, we're small enough that nobody notices. Nobody's going to care about us. Let me tell you, they care about you. And one thing about the internet is you can automate tools so that they can check through everything. Spiders can go through the whole internet and look for vulnerabilities everywhere there are and start to use them. There was there was a big issue last year about JP Morgan. It turned out of all the servers they had, there was one server that hadn't been upgraded to two-factor authentication. And that server was exploited. And that server led to the break-in into JP Morgan that happened about a year ago. 83 million accounts at JP Morgan were exposed. TJ Maxx, SEI was involved in this. TJ Maxx was using wireless kind of technology to scan your credit cards. They didn't want to have just cash registers. They wanted to look more friendly than that. So they had little handheld devices. The clerk could come up with you, and when you wanted to buy something, they could just run the card through the handheld, just like a lot of rental car companies do. It turns out that they had not put any kind of encryption on the wireless connection from the handheld to their internet, to their router. Yeah, I know, it seems funny, but they did this. And as a result, there was a cabal of cybersecurity kind of criminals, led by a guy named Alberto Gonzalez in Miami, who noticed this and initially sat outside a TJ Maxx with a sniffer and started sucking up credit cards. And they were getting them one at a time, you know, and that was pretty good. But then they thought, gosh, we've got unencrypted access into their system. Why don't we send a piece of code in there so we don't have to sit outside here in the heat in Miami and just have all this information sent to us? So they did, and then they found out through TJ Maxx they could get to the TJ Maxx parent company, and through that parent company they got access to the credit cards not only of TJ Maxx, but all the companies that belong to the sort of corporate structure of TJ Maxx, and they ended up with 45 million credit cards. Now this was an interesting group. It had 2 people from Miami, a few people from Belarus, and a few people from Russia in on this. There are sites on the internet where you can go buy credit cards. A few years ago we looked at those, and you could buy a good credit card with all the verification for $5. Okay? Millions of credit cards on the internet that you can buy for $5. And when you buy a credit card, you can probably use it for maybe $100 worth of stuff before you're caught. And then the bank's going to shut it down because they notice the anomalous behavior, because they have very advanced algorithms looking at behavior. But then you go buy another $5 credit card. You know, the ROI on a $5 credit card is maybe 20 to 1. So this is a big issue. This is the one that the banks face. And this was all because they didn't encrypt that link from the handheld to their router. So one of the key things is that we have to kind of have network awareness and cybersecurity practices spread throughout the workforce, not just the CIO, not just the person, network administrator, but the clerks, the CEOs, the board members. You know, everybody in the organization has to be aware of cybersecurity. We have to look at our networks the way an attacker would. And this is why red teams sometimes can be very important, to have someone actually attack your network and find those vulnerabilities, because there are vulnerabilities in every one of our networks. Social engineering is another big problem. Gosh, every day I get social engineering attacks. Some of them are the real gross ones that everybody knows. I'm a prince from Nigeria. I've got $40 million. I'll give you 30 million of it if you help me get it out of the country. How many of y'all have seen those? Yeah, we've all seen some of those, right? Some of them are a lot more sophisticated now. You know, it looks like it's coming from your bank. It says we think your bank account maybe has been hacked. Click on here, enter your security, enter your password, and we'll restart your account. If you don't do it, we're going to have to terminate your account for now. How many people have seen those? I've gotten those. They're pretty good. They look slick. They got the right logos and everything on them. But your bank would never do that. One of the tricks on phishing is not to click on stuff inside of an email. If your bank tells you that, separately enter the bank website and see if they've got the same message and information there. Okay? Remember that. That's a real basic thing for all of us to do in our personal life. Don't click on that email account because you never know. Another thing you can do is kind of, run your mouse over the clicks and see what's really there. Because sometimes it looks like Texas, USAA, right? And you run it over that, and it's got an address in some country you never heard of. That's always a telltale. But basically, don't click on that email link if you can help it at all. In the military, in the US military, they've been really sophisticated spear phishing attacks that look like they're coming from generals and admirals to other generals and admirals. But the message is a little weird. I actually fell for something like this recently, not from a general. One of the guys that's the vice chair of the Defense Science Board, I got an email from him saying, here's an interesting story, you should check this out. I am on a study for him. It was a story that did pertain to that study. And I looked at it and I thought, oh God, should I or shouldn't I? I was on an iPad, which helped. And I clicked on it, and the story came up. It was about cyber attacks and everything. I felt pretty good. I got home about 2 days later, and my CIO called me and said, it was on the way home from India. I was in Frankfurt, Germany when I clicked. Did you click on a website while you were in Frankfurt, Germany about this? And I said, yeah, I did. It was from the Defense Science Board. He said, well, that website actually went to a router in China. And I said, well, I didn't know that. So there I was tired coming back from India, wasn't thinking as clearly as I should, clicked on the wrong website, and that's that. Because it was on an iPad, it was a little easier to clean up than if it had been on a Windows machine. Spear phishing recently led to some hacks this is where things start to get cyber physical. Spear phishing recently led to some problems in a German iron manufacturing facility where the people were able to gain access and not let the furnaces go cool, not turn the furnaces off so the furnaces started to overheat. Similar thing happened to Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company, where they had some problems where they lost control of their refinery in Saudi Arabia. These things can have really big effects, not just on money and personal information, but tremendous damage to physical infrastructure. We all know about Stuxnet. We're not all sure what happened in Stuxnet, but Stuxnet, anybody here not heard of Stuxnet? Okay, Stuxnet was an attack apparently that went through Windows. It's more directed against Iran. Once it got into the Windows system, it looked for a specific control system built by Siemens that was specific to the centrifuges used to purify nuclear material. You all know there's issues about nuclear material right now in Iran and some of the progress they've made. And what this would do was then make those centrifuges spin to destruction. Okay? So another attack that ended up doing a physical destruction of a physical material, but starting in a cyber domain. We don't know, I don't know anybody who really knows who did this. There's a lot of suspicion that the US or maybe Israel did this, but we don't know. So one of the key things is to learn quickly, wherever you go, how to protect your assets, how to protect your organization's assets, protect your personal information. Be a little careful about this. This is you're not going to be perfect, just like I wasn't perfect when I was coming back from India. But do the best job you can. Manage your risk. Think of this as a risk problem. And just like any other kind of risk, you've got to accept some risk in life. If you want to go anywhere, you drive a car, every day you accept some risk. You get an airplane, you accept some risk. I bank by internet, I accept some risk. But I like the convenience of it. But really think about the risk you're accepting as you do this. Insiders, this is not a software issue per se, but one of the kind of key things in cybersecurity is that insiders can inflict more damage on your system than any hacker from the outside can do. Think about that, okay? And one database that we maintain at the Software Engineering Institute is a database of about, I think it's about 1,200 cases now of insider threat in the United States that has been caught and prosecuted. And as part of the cases, we got to interview the prosecutors, the people who collected the forensics information, and even more interesting, the criminals in jail. Okay? Now, this doesn't mean that these were insiders who were caught. There are probably some insiders who weren't caught. Those are the really clever ones, right? But at least for the ones that have caught, we've looked at about 1,200 cases, and we've been able to figure out what some of the motivations are and what some of the patterns are. And you can see some of the kind of key things here. Most of the non-national espionage cases fall into three big categories: intellectual property theft, IT sabotage, and fraud. Fraud's where people broke into systems to get money. IP theft is where they got in to steal some IP that might be useful to them as they move companies, as they change businesses, as they maybe start a company. And IT sabotage where somebody was just mad. And actually, there's a fair number of those where somebody got fired in a company and they still had an entree maybe at the sort of network system administrator privileges, and they destroyed data or they did something else. And there's a couple of cases here that I'll go through quick. Yes?
What kind of penalties do they have? What kind of penalties do they get?
Well, it depends on the country, depends on their caught. Most of the people in the US that have been caught, they're pretty much in jail for life. Okay? And in jail, they can't use a computer. So one that happened, this is almost 10 years ago, a guy who was trying to get a job at in a municipal sewage organization. He worked there temporarily, thought he was going to get a job, he didn't get the job. He had network system administrative privileges, and so what he did is left a sort of time bomb in there that periodically opened up the sewer gates and put sewage into the river. This is around Brisbane, Australia. And it took him the longest time to figure this out. Like 80,000 liters of raw sewage into the river. He wasn't looking to make any money, he was just mad, right? He was just trying to get even. We've had cases of companies going out of business because insiders destroyed all their data. Companies have had all their accounts receivables destroyed, all copies of it. What company can survive that, right? By IT. So be careful when you have insiders. So I think I have a couple things. Oh, the data breach at Coca-Cola. We talk about that. So at Coca-Cola, what they had is they had, when their computers got old, their laptops, they were destroying them, right? That makes sense. Except the guy that was destroying them wasn't destroying them. He was taking them and looking for information on them. And they had unencrypted information about a lot of their clients and other people on there. And so ultimately he had data for 74,000 people on these laptops that were on their way to being destroyed. The target breach also involved insider information, but in a strange way that's made us think about insider information differently. Yeah, many of you heard about the Target breach about a year ago, right? And so in Target what happened, and it has a Pittsburgh root actually, It wasn't a Target employee, but they had a subcontractor in Pittsburgh that worked on their heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems that actually was given super access privileges to the Target network. Now, it turns out the guy at the HVAC company didn't go bad, but he got spearphished for his passwords. And so they spearphished him, ultimately had access to the Target system, stole, all this information. Target has paid, $61 million in 2013, 17 million in net expenses. They've also had 44 million in insurance receivables, and it's not over. There's some people that say this ultimately is going to cost them over $1 billion. And that doesn't even cost in their reputational damage and the loss of business that they're making. Spearphishing through an outsider that was given insider privileges. Think about that in any of your companies when you do that. So we think it's important to adopt best practices to mitigate these threats. Unfortunately, there's not a technical answer to this. We can have technical monitors on our network to look if there's anomalous behavior, but most of the time an insider is doing things that they're actually authorized to do. So anomalous behavior is not going to be found. What we have to do is kind of say, this is another area where managers, HR departments all have to think about this. When you're getting ready to fire somebody for cause, maybe you want to take their privileges away. Maybe you want to make sure they don't have too many excessive privileges. Even if they still have email, maybe they shouldn't have system admin privileges, right? So we got to think about that as we go forward. Cyber threats are ongoing and growing in sophistication. There's other websites on the net where you can dial up a cyber threat. You can, I mentioned the credit cards, but there's places where you can go on to buy malware, rent malware, find malware that you can modify to attack various things, all on the internet, sort of on the black side of the internet. And as you can see, U.S. intelligence agencies rank cyber attacks as the top danger to national security now, even ahead of terrorism. They're really worried about the economic impact of this, of the theft of IP, and how this really is kind of changing. Companies and people invest a lot of money to develop certain technologies. And if that's stolen away real quickly, how fair is that to the people who have invested in this, toiled for this for a long period of time? Max Butler, anybody hear of the Iceman or Max Butler? So Max Butler is a little before this TJ Maxx thing. Max Butler was an interesting character. He actually had been a cyber criminal who'd been caught, turned state evidence, was providing information to the FBI, and then decided, I can still do this and become a cyber criminal again. Lived in San Francisco, known as the Iceman, that was kind of his code word. He ended up stealing credit card accounts, had about 2 million kind of credit card accounts with all the things. He kind of was a personal guy. One of the key things, I think he was smart enough that he encrypted all his information. Hard encrypted, but fortunately, this is one place where SEI kind of helped. We helped the FBI to decrypt his encrypted hard drive. So don't feel good about encryption all the time. Nation states sometimes sponsor cyber attacks. Just about a year ago, 75 airports were impacted and had some problems. We still don't know what nation state did that, but we know it was from a nation state type organization. Russia has been the most overt about cyber warfare. And almost 10 years ago, they used cyber attacks on Estonia when they were unhappy with them about some things. About 6 years ago, they used some cyber attacks on Georgia as part of their campaign against Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state. And more recently, cyber is figuring in really strongly into their altercation with the Ukraine. There are times when the people in the Ukraine have no access, the government of Ukraine has no access to the internet because of the denial of service attacks. But they've also done sort of a watering hole attack where they built a site that looked like a regular site. A lot of people have gone to that, including East Europeans, not just Ukrainians. If they went to that, they got infected. They were then inspected, and if they were sufficiently important, then another piece of software was loaded on their systems that would start to siphon off kind of important information from their computers. Ultimately, if a determined adversary wants to get into your systems, they will. We got to assume that almost all of our systems have some sort of compromise in them. So now the thing is to think about resiliency. What do you put on the internet? What do you not? I've heard that Coca-Cola doesn't put their formula on the internet. You know, they've always been proud about their Coca-Cola formula. It's in a vault. I think only like 4 people in the company know it. They're never going to put it on the internet. At a lesser level, I heard Kentucky Fried Chicken doesn't put their formula on the internet either. I don't know if that's worth keeping, actually. Coca-Cola maybe, not Kentucky Fried Chicken. But you have to accept the fact that not all cyber attacks will be prevented. So how do you build your system so even if it's been attacked a little bit, even if it's been compromised, you can still do your work. You can minimize the impacts. You can go on, you can detect and clean up if it has to be. We have to assume that. Government organizations around the world are assuming this already. They know they're under attack, you know, so they work on the principle of how can we continue to operate while we're under attack and clean this up. I already mentioned the concept of risk. We have to balance risk. The internet has so many capabilities that we can't afford not to use it. But we have to understand the risk that we're assuming as we do. I wouldn't put everything about my life on Facebook. Some people do, right? I think I'd hold back a few things. So think about that as you work, as your children work, as your friends and stuff work. If they're getting ready to put something on Facebook or one of these other social media that you think's a little wrong, be a good friend, just like you might take their keys if they were intoxicated and not let them drive. Be a good friend and say, why don't you think about that? Why don't you wait till tomorrow to do that? Sometimes at the moment, something seems pretty good, and the next moment it doesn't seem so good, right? So ask them to put a little resistance, a little time delay in some of the things that they do. We believe it's very important that cybersecurity be something thought about by CEOs and boards. It's a real risk to the continuity of an organization. And that's one of the things you pay CEOs and boards to do, is to worry about the risk to the organization. One thing we talked about today is what kind of role does a university have in helping to provide education like that to board members and to CEOs? Because most of them are of an age that they didn't grow up with the internet as digital natives. You know, they're gray-haired people like me, and most of them didn't have the same technology background as I have. They haven't really experienced how the internet can change their lives yet. So we need to help educate them on that. We need to be systematic. We need to involve technology, people practices. Most importantly, all of us have to recognize that we have to learn continuously through our lives. Continuously. Yes. A lot of you are PhD students and master's students. You know, you get your degree and you go, whew, I'm done. It's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. Technology changes so fast. We often talk about a technology half-life of being 5 years, 8 years. That's how fast another whole 50% of new knowledge is generated. You have to stay on top of that as a professional, if you're a scientist and engineer, and continually be learning. And we need to be proactive. So I started this off by showing you the image of Cheyenne Mountain, except it really wasn't Cheyenne Mountain. It was actually the SAC command post that was used in that movie because the Cheyenne Mountain command post wasn't good enough. And this, on the other hand, is a real command post at AT&T's Global Network Operations Center, where they manage all of their network connections. And it's one room with all those screens, with all kinds of indicators and monitors, and it really only has maybe 10 to 12 people that keep all of AT&T's nets up and know the status and health of all of AT&T's nets at any given time. Ultimately, we need to make sure we continue to push. We don't get too scared by cybersecurity, and we continue to push for even more software innovation. I think I saw this building today. Boy, that was kind of clever. And the innovation that comes out of the people working on their bachelor's, master's, and PhDs, the young faculty members, the old faculty members, we want that innovation that comes out of each of you to help the whole world community. Think about security while you do that, but don't stop innovating. The innovation is the important part. That's what's going to change the world. That's what's going to make life better in Africa, in South America, in North America, in Asia, in maybe even Antarctica, in Europe. You know, we want to keep that innovation cycle going because the innovation cycle has helped us so much over the last 30 or 40 years. I've gone to India about 5 times in the last 10 years. You can see the country and all the people that have moved into the middle class in India, and how that's changed India. You see the same thing going on in China, in Mexico, in Peru, in Bolivia, in Colombia. Big software business in Colombia. We're kind of retraining druggies to be software people. I actually been to Medellin. They say Medellin, we say Medellin, but and it's one of the software capitals of Colombia. And they're great people there, and they're dedicated people. A lot of small software companies, very entrepreneurial, trying to make things work. Gosh, you got to admire that. That's the engine of innovation. That's what makes things better. So ultimately, we all want to work on finding better engineering solutions to the problems that are out there. You know, one of the great things about engineers is they work on problems. They try to make things better. They make life better. Sometimes in TV shows, we're portrayed as people working in cubicles. But in reality, we're the people who create all the new world. We're the people who create new capabilities that improve life. Today, I was very impressed. I'll just close by this. I'm very impressed by talking to the faculty and students here. Boy, smart people trying to think of smart things, working hard. You know, one of the regrets I have in my life is that as I was going through school and getting my PhD, I always wanted to be a faculty guy, and I never made it. Life took me in a different direction. But I really admire all the dedication, professionalism, sort of the sacrifices faculty make sometimes to do what they do, to teach people, to bring up a next generation, to inspire a next generation. And so from me to you, all of you who are faculty, who will be faculty, boy, my hat's off to you for all the things that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nielsen, for such a wonderful talk. We may have time for a few questions.
Sure, happy to do that, happy to do that. Any easy questions? No hard questions. Yes, ma'am.
There was a U.S. drone that was landed in Iran. Do you think it was technical problem
Yes.
or a satellite attack?
Yeah, I don't know. I was not in the Air Force anymore. I didn't know. And if I knew, I couldn't say. Yes, Larry.
You, on one of your charts, you said, model the threat.
Yes?
Model the threat.
Right.
How do we keep up with the evolution of that threat?
Well, that is a problem. That is one of the challenges. But you know, we got our feelers out, both on the criminal side and the nation-state side, and we can do that, I think. One thing is to consider our own offense and defense. You know, like we did in the electronic warfare world, the offense and defense had to kind of work together. Sometimes in the cyber world, the offense and defense don't want to work together because the offense doesn't want to reveal what it's possibly exploiting. Yes, sir.
So what sort of regulatory protections do you see? So you mentioned some about U.S. CERT, and I know things like they have an industrial control system piece. But is the typical consumer protections that we have are done by regulatory agencies like the Consumer Product Safety Commission and the NHTSA. So do you see sort of a need for...
Boy, this is a really interesting question. So I know the question, I know where you're going. So what are the regulatory issues out there that might help us, or might hurt us, whatever, you know? And, you know, if you, there's things as simple as Underwriter Labs. It says whether an electrical socket you buy might be good. There's other things that try to protect consumers through credit and other kind of efforts. This is still a little bit of the Wild West. And each of us accepts that. Because usually when we buy commercial software, somewhere there's a 43-page or screen document that says all the limitations and how they aren't liable for anything. And most of us don't read that and we go, I agree, right? I mean, each time the new update for iPhone operating system comes out, you see that, whoever reads that? You want your iPhone. So there's some problems on that. Now, I think if it ever came out that there was really negligence, those things would not be a protection. But if it was, oh, we did our best effort and it didn't work, those are protections there, you know. Now, the banks, as we talked about, already provide some level of protection to you. Some of them, as you may know, are getting ready to change a little bit of that level of protection in the United States. And the U.S., how many people here are U.S.? None? Oh, okay. And how many are from other countries? International people, yeah. So most international people already have chip and pin technology on their credit cards. The U.S. sort of has the older technology of those swipe cards. And the banks in the U.S. are getting ready to move away from those swipe cards. One of the problems with moving away from swipe cards is that we have this infrastructure everywhere in all of our stores with swipe cards, and to read them. And a lot of the organizations don't want to spend the extra money to get the kind of equipment that reads the chip and pin. But the banks have found a great way to do that. They said, okay, you can continue to use swipe cards, but we will not protect you from any cyber fraud. As a company, you'll just have to absorb that. If you use the chip and pin, and of course on your own buy the chip and pin reader, then we'll still provide this limited liability that you have if you use one of our credit cards. So they're trying to motivate people that way. It is a little bit of a Wild West, as I mentioned. There's a little bit of personal responsibility and risk management that we have to do, and then certainly corporate responsibility and risk management has to be done. That's right here.
One more question after that we have to adjourn.
If you look your slide number 45,
Okay.
in that slide it was written snake malware.
Yes, yes.
What is the reason why it is called snake malware?
Oh.
Is there something like dog malware, tiger malware, lion malware?
No.
Why this is
So,
called snake malware?
okay, this is a specific thing. A lot of malware has a name, at least a name that's being used by common people. Heartbleed is a name, right? And so one particular bit of software is called Snake. It's a piece of software that's known throughout the malware community as Snake. And Snake goes in and finds its way around your system and reports out stuff. So that's just sort of like a pet name for this little piece of software. There's nothing derogatory to snakes.
So there is nothing called tiger malware, lion malware?
Well, okay, so let me tell you, so that's a good question. So we also own the U.S. catalog for malware at SEI. We kind of manage that for the government. When I last asked, which was about 3 months ago, we had 160 million pieces of malware in our catalog. And we were getting 1.6 million new pieces a week. Okay? Now, many of these end up being variations of a theme, things that have been changed just a little bit. And so they're family trees of malware inside there too. And so as a convenience, to the most important ones, the ones that really are having impact, almost all of them end up getting a name of some sort. Instead of calling them, by 18 numbers and letters, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, they call them a name, a kind of a nickname. And Snake is one of those. That's all.
Well, thank you very much, Dr.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
We have a token of appreciation
Oh, my
for you
goodness.
to take as a memory
Oh.
of visiting UT Arlington.
Well, that wasn't necessary. The big treat for me was meeting all the people.
Absolutely.
That's always the big
Thank
treat.
you so
Thank
much.
you so
We
much.
really appreciate you being here. It's been an honor to have
Oh,
you
my
here.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here.